I knew something was wrong the moment I walked into the server room Monday morning and heard silence instead of the usual hum of cooling fans. That room had been my second home for 8 years, the place where the financial heartbeat of Iron Ridge Construction Group kept pumping. Without that system running, nearly 12,000 construction workers across Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado wouldn't get paid on Friday. And when construction workers don't get paid, they don't send polite emails, they park their equipment, and the entire job site shuts down. Before we go further, I'm curious, where are you listening from? And what's the temperature where you are right now? It's always interesting to see how far these stories travel, and if this story resonates with you, consider subscribing. It helps these lessons reach more people. My name is Davina West, 46 years old, and I've been the Senior Database Administrator responsible for payroll systems since Iron Ridge was half the size it is today. I run the back end that calculates pay for everyone, from concrete crews in Houston to crane operators in Phoenix. Construction payroll isn't like paying office employees. These people work through heat waves, storms, weekends, and federal contract deadlines. Their paychecks involve overtime rules, hazard pay, union contracts, and multi-state tax laws that change depending on where the crew worked that week. The system I built to handle all that isn't pretty. It's a complicated structure of legacy SQL databases, custom scripts, and 8 years of careful patches layered together like parts inside an old diesel engine. But it works. Then 2 weeks ago, someone in corporate sent me an Excel spreadsheet. The file claimed it could replace the entire payroll system I'd spent nearly a decade building. At the time, I laughed, because spreadsheets are great for classroom models, but construction payroll isn't a classroom exercise, and whoever created that spreadsheet clearly had never tried paying 12,000 construction workers at the same time. The funny part, that Excel file arrived 3 days before our new executive vice president, Arthur Grell, officially started his job. From this point onward, the story is no longer just a simple event. The following sections will include some fictional details and AI-assisted storytelling to highlight the emotions and lessons behind it. Choose what resonates with you, and if nothing resonates, that's okay too. Take care of yourself, and perhaps we'll meet again in another story. The meeting happened on Tuesday morning. HR asked me to come upstairs to the executive floor, the part of the building most of us only visit when something bad is about to happen. The hallway smelled like expensive carpet cleaner and corporate anxiety. Inside the office sat Arthur Grell, our brand new executive vice president of operations. Across from him was Linda Carver from HR, holding a folder that already told me how this conversation was going to end. Arthur didn't even look up when I walked in. He was tapping on a tablet like he was finishing something more important than the conversation he'd called me here for. "Davina," he finally said, "we're restructuring the payroll infrastructure." That word restructuring always means the same thing. Someone's about to lose their job. I sat down across from his glass desk. "What does that mean for payroll operations?" I asked. Arthur leaned back in his chair and smiled the way consultants do when they think they're about to explain something revolutionary. "That's where things get exciting." He tapped his tablet again. "I'd like you to meet Megan Whitlock." The door opened, and a woman in her mid-20s walked in carrying an iPad, and the kind of confidence that only comes from never having broken anything important before. "Megan just finished her MBA," Arthur said proudly, "and she's built an incredible model that's going to transform how we handle payroll." She placed the iPad on the table and turned the screen toward me. It was the spreadsheet, the same Excel file I'd received 2 weeks earlier. "Your current system is very thorough," Megan said politely, "but also very manual." Manual. The way she said it made 8 years of engineering sound like I'd been doing payroll with a calculator and a notepad. "I think we can do better," she continued. Then she tapped the screen. "This Excel model can handle everything your database does." I stared at the spreadsheet for a long moment, because at that moment, I realized something important. They weren't asking for my opinion. They were showing me my replacement, for a moment. Nobody said anything. I looked at the spreadsheet on Megan's screen. Color-coded columns, pivot tables, tidy formulas stretching across dozens of cells. It looked impressive, in the same way a toy dashboard looks impressive to someone who's never flown a plane. You want to run payroll for 12,000 construction workers with Excel? I finally asked. Megan smiled politely. Not just Excel. This model includes automated calculations, conditional formatting, and macros. It's essentially a lightweight database. Lightweight. That word alone told me she had no idea what she was dealing with. I turned my chair slightly toward Arthur. The payroll run is Friday, I said calmly. Today is Tuesday. If you're planning to switch systems, you need to understand how complicated this actually is. Megan nodded confidently, but I could already see her eyes glazing over. This isn't just hours times hourly rate. I continued. We calculate prevailing wages for federal contracts, union overtime rules that change depending on the project and the number of days a crew has worked, hazard pay for certain sites, multi-state taxes when crews move across state lines during the same week. Arthur waved his hand dismissively. Megan's model accounts for regulatory variations. Regulatory variations. That was corporate language for we skimmed the rules in a textbook. I leaned forward slightly. In Arizona alone, I said, there are over 800 different job classifications under prevailing wage law. Each county can have different pay rates depending on the contract. Megan tapped her spreadsheet. That's what lookup tables are for. Lookup tables. I almost laughed. Because construction payroll isn't clean data, it's messy. Crew foremen enter time wrong, systems glitch, workers move job sites halfway through the week, and every time something breaks, someone has to know how to fix it. After a moment, Arthur spoke again. Davina, HR will need you to provide Megan with system access, documentation, and passwords for a smooth transition. That was when the truth finally landed. They weren't testing her model. They had already decided. My last day would be Friday. I didn't argue. After 8 years in corporate systems, you learn something important once executives decide on a plan. Logic rarely changes their minds. All right, I said quietly. I'll document what I can. Arthur nodded like the situation had been resolved efficiently. Linda from HR slid the folder toward me. Severance paperwork, exit instructions, corporate language carefully written to make terminations sound like an opportunity. Your last day will be Friday, she said. After the payroll run, that will give Megan enough time to transition. Enough time. I almost smiled, because there are things you can document in a system, and there are things you can't. The next 2 days felt like watching a slow-motion train wreck. On Wednesday morning, Megan sat beside me with her iPad while I walked her through the payroll process. Why do you manually verify the Arizona wage classifications, she asked. Because the state database has been partially corrupted since 2019. I explained. About 3% of the job codes return the wrong county rates. She blinked. Can't we just fix the database? It's a state system, I said. We don't control it. She typed something into her tablet. Probably fix database later. That's the thing about people who build models in classrooms. They assume systems behave logically. Real systems don't. Real systems are full of small glitches you only learn after years of dealing with them. I know the Phoenix warehouse time clock double logs hours after 11 at night if the network is overloaded. I know a union clause that triggers meal penalties if concrete crews work past 10 hours without a break. None of that exists in a spreadsheet. Thursday afternoon, Megan finally imported real payroll data into her Excel model. 12,000 employee records, 47 active job sites, 4 states. The spreadsheet froze almost immediately. It's just loading, she said quickly, but I recognized the warning signs. Excel wasn't loading. It was drowning. And by Friday morning, Megan was about to discover exactly how deep the water was. Friday morning arrived faster than I expected. Megan showed up early, carrying her laptop and a large cup of coffee, like someone about to start an exciting project instead of the most dangerous payroll run this company had ever attempted. Ready to make history, she said with a nervous smile. I packed the last of my things from my desk, a coffee mug, a photo from a job site visit years ago, and a small bottle of bourbon I kept for emergency nights when systems crashed at 2 in the morning. It felt appropriate to take it home. The bank cutoff for direct deposits is noon, I reminded her. She nodded without looking up from the spreadsheet filling her screen. Excel was grinding through the data like an overloaded engine. You'll see some warnings during processing, she said confidently. The model recalculates several datasets. Warnings. I'd seen that screen before. Cells flashing error messages across half the columns, circular references, broken lookups. Excel trying to process calculations it was never designed to handle. I leaned slightly toward her desk. You might want to test the payroll on a smaller dataset first. It's fine, Megan said quickly. The tone in her voice had changed. Confidence was slowly turning into concentration. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to explain. At 9:30 that morning, I signed the final paperwork with HR downstairs. Security handed me my exit badge and walked me through the lobby like I was leaving a hotel instead of a company I'd helped run for almost a decade. Outside, the air felt strangely calm. I drove home in my pickup truck, windows down, the radio playing quietly, for a while. Nothing happened. Then, around 10:30, my phone buzzed. A message from Kevin in Payroll. Davina, something's wrong. Another message arrived seconds later. Some paychecks are showing negative hours. Then another. Why does the system say I earned $800 an hour? I stared at the messages. Because I already knew what had happened. And the bank hadn't even processed the payroll file yet. By 11 in the morning, my phone looked like a Christmas tree. Messages were coming in faster than I could read them. Payroll clerks, site supervisors, crew foremen from 3 different states. Everyone was seeing the same thing. The numbers made absolutely no sense. One message from a crane operator in Phoenix read Davina. My pay stub says I worked -6 hours last week. Does that mean I owe the company money? Another came from a concrete finisher in Albuquerque. According to this thing, I'm making $847 an hour. I wish. I could picture exactly what had happened. When Megan imported the payroll data, she'd mixed up the column headers. Employee ID numbers were being treated as hours worked. Hours worked were being treated as pay rates. And somewhere in the formula chain, Excel had started multiplying Social Security numbers like they were hourly wages. That's the danger of spreadsheets. They don't understand context. They just follow formulas. At 11:45, my phone rang. It was Linda from HR. Her voice sounded tight. Davina, we have a problem. What kind of problem, according to Megan's payroll file? The company owes the federal government $2.3 million in tax withholdings this week. I leaned back in my chair on my porch. How much was actually withheld from employee paychecks? There was a long pause. About $180,000. That's when I realized the spreadsheet hadn't just produced bad numbers. It had created a mathematical black hole. And the bank I asked, they're refusing to process the file, Linda said quietly. They think we've been hacked. I looked out at the quiet street in front of my house, because by noon, the payroll deposit deadline would pass, and 12,000 construction workers were about to find out they hadn't been paid. In construction. That kind of mistake doesn't stay quiet for long. The situation inside Iron Ridge Construction had turned from confusion into full-scale panic. The bank had rejected the payroll file, not just rejected it. Their automated system flagged it as potential financial fraud. According to the transaction report, the company was attempting to send impossible deposits to impossible accounts using data that didn't match any normal payroll structure. Meanwhile, 12,000 workers were logging into the employee portal to check their pay stubs, and the numbers looked insane. Some workers appeared to be earning executive-level salaries. Others somehow owed the company thousands of dollars. A few paychecks listed negative net pay. Within an hour, screenshots were spreading across group chats between crews. Then the union got involved. The call went out to Daniel Crow, the regional union representative for several of Iron Ridge's largest construction projects. Daniel had spent 20 years defending construction workers, and he had exactly 0 patience for payroll mistakes. By 3 in the afternoon, he was standing on the back of a pickup truck outside the main office holding a megaphone. If they can't pay the workers. His voice echoed through the parking lot. Then the workers don't work. That's how construction strikes begin. Not with speeches, with silence. Across 4 states, cranes stopped moving. Concrete trucks stayed parked. Excavators sat idle at job sites that normally ran 12 hours a day. By 4 o'clock, nearly every Iron Ridge construction project had shut down. Thousands of workers were sitting in their trucks, watching the news, because local reporters had already arrived, and the story spreading across social media was simple. A major construction company couldn't figure out how to pay its workers. Back at headquarters, panic was spreading just as quickly. My phone buzzed again. A message from Eddie, one of the IT technicians still inside the building. Megan locked herself in the conference room. He wrote, "She's been trying to fix that spreadsheet for 3 hours." Then another message appeared. "You might want to turn on the news." Local news stations were running aerial footage of idle construction sites across 4 states. Reporters stood in front of half-finished highway projects, explaining how Iron Ridge Construction Group had failed to pay 12,000 workers. The footage looked surreal. Cranes frozen mid-air, concrete trucks parked in long, silent lines, workers sitting on tailgates holding pay stubs that made no mathematical sense. I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee when my phone rang. The name on the screen made me smile. Arthur Grell. I let it ring once more before answering. "Morning." "Arthur." His voice sounded like someone who hadn't slept in 2 days. "Davina, we need to talk." I took a slow sip of coffee. "I saw the news. Looks like things are going well." "Cut the sarcasm," he said quickly. "The state labor boards in 4 states have opened investigations. The union is threatening a class action lawsuit, and the bank froze our operating accounts because the payroll file triggered their fraud detection system. That part didn't surprise me. Banks get very nervous when companies try to transfer impossible amounts of money." "I need you to come back," Arthur said. "Consulting basis, just until we stabilize the system." There it was, the call I had been expecting since Friday. "What kind of consulting rate are we talking about?" I asked. "Name your price." I leaned back in my chair. $15,000 up front. Cash. Silence. Then Arthur exhaled slowly. "Done. I'm not finished." I continued. "I want a new contract, double my previous salary, and I report directly to the Chief Information Officer from now on, not operations." Another long pause. "You're in no position to negotiate," Arthur said weakly. I looked down the quiet street, across 4 states. His construction empire was completely frozen. "Actually," I said calmly, "I think I am." The silence on the phone lasted several seconds. Finally, Arthur spoke again. "Fine, just fix this." I stood up and grabbed my truck keys, because for the next few days, Iron Ridge Construction wasn't really Arthur's company anymore. It was mine. I drove back to Iron Ridge headquarters earlier than planned. The parking lot looked different than it had a few days earlier. Pickup trucks from union crews were still parked along the edges, and a few workers were sitting on their tailgates drinking coffee while waiting for news. When they saw my truck pull in, a couple of them nodded. Word travels fast in construction. They already knew why I was back, near the entrance. Daniel Crow, the union representative, was leaning against a truck with a clipboard in his hand. He walked over as I stepped out of the cab. "Davina," he said, "tell me you're here to save this mess. I'm working on it." I replied, "You fix payroll, and these sites will be running again within hours." He studied my face for a moment before nodding. "Good, because 12,000 workers are waiting on you, inside the building." The atmosphere felt like a disaster response center. Phones ringing, managers pacing the hallways, people speaking in low voices like they were standing inside a hospital waiting room. I walked straight past the front desk and toward the server room. No one tried to stop me, they knew better. The moment I opened the door, the quiet room felt strangely familiar again. My workstation was exactly where I'd left it. Megan's spreadsheet disaster was still sitting on the main screen. I opened the system logs. It was worse than I expected. During her attempts to fix the spreadsheet, Megan had overwritten several database tables, created circular references inside the tax calculation modules, and locked multiple transaction files that the payroll engine depended on. The payroll data itself was corrupted, employee records duplicated, tax values scrambled. At one point, the system had somehow generated a report listing 800,000 employees named Error. I almost admired the creativity of the failure. But the real problem was deeper. When Megan panicked Monday afternoon, she had tried to reload the payroll data. In the process, she deleted the original raw files, which meant the only intact records left were buried inside the transaction backup logs. Fortunately for Iron Ridge, I knew exactly where those logs were stored, and more importantly, how to rebuild the entire payroll system from them. It took me 18 straight hours. I rebuilt the payroll database piece by piece, using the archived transaction logs Megan didn't even know existed. Every employee record, every tax calculation, every overtime rule that had been buried under her spreadsheet disaster. By 6 Thursday morning, the system was ready. I transmitted the corrected payroll file to the bank. This time, the transfer went through in less than 30 seconds. Across 4 states, 12,000 construction workers woke up to find their paychecks deposited exactly where they were supposed to be, along with overtime compensation for the days they had been forced to sit idle. By mid-morning, the job sites were alive again. Cranes moving, concrete trucks rolling out, engines starting across projects that had been frozen for days. Later that afternoon, I walked into Arthur Grell's office. He looked 10 years older than he had the week before. "It's done," I told him. "Everyone's been paid." Arthur nodded slowly. "And Megan, she's been reassigned," he said quietly. "Marketing research?" I stepped into my new office overlooking the equipment yard. Because sometimes companies learn a hard lesson. Experience isn't outdated, and real systems aren't built in spreadsheets. What stayed with me after everything settled wasn't the argument, the spreadsheets, or even the chaos that followed. It was the reminder that behind every system, every line of code, and every calculation, there are real people whose lives depend on it. 12,000 workers weren't just numbers in a database, they were families paying rent, buying groceries, and showing up every morning to build something real. Sometimes experience looks quiet and ordinary until the day it's gone, and everyone suddenly realizes how much it mattered. If you had been in my place, what would you have done? Walked away, or stood your ground and let the truth reveal itself? I'm curious where you're listening from today, because stories like this travel farther than we expect, and if this story made you think even a little differently about work, respect, or experience, consider subscribing to the channel. A single subscription, a like, or a share might help this story reach someone else who needs the reminder that doing your job with integrity still matters, in a small way. You become part of spreading that message, and that's something worth being proud of. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.